You have probably seen comments like this one before. America is collapsing, the world is de-dollarizing, the dollar is finished. It sounds dramatic, it feels dramatic, but here's the truth. This isn't a Hollywood-style collapse story. It's slower, more subtle, and in many ways, more dangerous. So let's start with the foundation. What is the petrodollar? After the 1970s, the United States made a critical deal with oil-producing nations, especially Saudi Arabia. Oil would be priced and traded globally in US dollars. So that means if you're in Japan, Germany, India, Brazil, anywhere, and you want oil, you need dollars first. So what do countries do? They hold dollar reserves, trade in dollars, buy U.S. Treasury bonds, and that's the petrodollar system. And it creates a permanent global demand for U.S. dollars. So what is a world reserve currency? It's the currency central banks trust, the one used for global trade, international debt, commodity pricing, and financial stability. And right now, that is the U.S. dollar. And that status gives the United States something almost no one talks about clearly. The ability to consume more than it produces indefinitely. Got that? A national credit card with no limit and no due date. The only one on the planet. For now. And that's the story. Because all things eventually come to an end. And when they have to. And we are nearing that end. And painfully soon. So why should this matter for Americans? And it does, because the system quietly subsidizes your life and mine too. It means cheaper imports, lower interest rates, stronger purchasing power, and the ability to run massive deficits. The U.S. can borrow trillions and still function because the world needs dollars. But now let's ask that uncomfortable question. What happens if that changes? What if the world doesn't need dollars, if countries start trading oil, metals, and goods in other currencies? They don't need as many dollars. They don't need to hold the U.S. debt, and they don't need treasuries, and that means less demand for U.S. debt. And so if there's less demand, interest rates will rise. So if there's fewer buyers that want U.S. debt, the U.S. has to offer higher interest rates to attract them right now. The U.S. already spends $1 trillion per year just on interest. And if that rate rises meaningfully, well, that number explodes. And let's talk numbers in plain English. The U.S. federal spending is roughly $7 trillion, and tax revenue is $4.5 to $5 trillion. So you see the gap? It's $2 trillion annually. And that gap is funded by borrowing. I don't care what you heard about $1 trillion in tariffs, there's a $2 trillion gap. And so now imagine borrowing becomes harder and more expensive. You have only three options. Number one, raise taxes. Number two, cut spending. Or number three, print money. And realistically, you'll do all three. So to maintain current spending without easy borrowing, you need to close a $2 trillion gap. And there are about 160 million taxpayers. Let's do the math. That's roughly 12,000 to 15,000 more per taxpayer per year. And, well, not everybody in the U.S. pays taxes, let's put it like that. So that's not theoretical, that's arithmetic. And percentage-wise, for many households, that's a 20 to 40% increase in total federal tax burden. So if taxes don't fully cover it, spending has to get cut. But where? Well, probably the big three: Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and defense. And there's no way around it. Discretionary spending is too small to fix the problems. And so most Americans' wealth is tied up in their homes. Most homes are leveraged, mortgage dependent, and if interest rates rise significantly, mortgage rates rise, monthly payments rise, and fewer buyers qualify. And you know what that means? Home prices fall. Not necessarily overnight, but structurally. A 2 to 3% increase in mortgage rates can reduce buying power by 20 to 30%. That directly pressures home values. So here's where it becomes personal. If the dollar weakens globally, imports get more expensive, and that means energy costs rise, consumer goods rise, food prices rise, wages don't. So this isn't hyperinflation overnight. It's persistent erosion. Your paycheck buys less every year. Sound familiar? It should. So let's separate fear from reality. Default or not paying debt is still unlikely in the near term because the U.S. can still print dollars. But currency debasement, that's much more likely, and it's already happening. But slowly. If reserve status weakens, the U.S. is more likely to inflate away its debt and not formally default, which gets us to de-dollarization, the reality check. Let's push back on the narrative. Yes, countries are exploring alternatives. Some trade, some is moving away from dollars, but the dollar still dominates global trade, at least right now. Most debt is still dollar denominated, and there is no true replacement yet. Transitions like this take decades, not years. But what does it mean for the typical American? This is the part that absolutely nobody wants to hear. You don't lose everything overnight. Instead, you experience higher taxes, higher living costs, lower real wages, reduced benefits, and weaker asset growth. It's a slow squeeze, not a sudden collapse. And so historically, in countries facing similar transitions, people shift savings into hard assets, reduce debt exposure, focus on income stability, and cut discretionary spending. The middle class feels it the most because they rely on wages, they rely on asset appreciation, they rely on stability. Here's the truth that cuts through all the noise. Losing world reserve status doesn't destroy America overnight, but it removes a massive hidden advantage. And without that advantage, the system has to rebalance. And rebalancing always means somebody pays, something shrinks, expectations adjust. So when you hear America is collapsing, it's too simple. The real story is quieter. America is slowly being forced to live within its means. And for a country that hasn't had to do that in decades, that is a profound shift. And now you know the rest of the world reserve currency and petrodollar story. So build that stack. iBankerU. Good day.